Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Lots of snow along with extreme cold warnings have hit a number of regions in Western Canada, including here in Alberta. We have the details. As the temperature goes down and natural gas usage goes up, we hear from Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas about how the carbon tax on home heating continues to hurt so many. And we hear from a couple of investigative journalists who explain exactly who two of Israel's biggest threats are, Hamas and the Houthis.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Environment Canada has issued Arctic outflow and extreme cold warnings for many parts of the West, including here in Alberta, also in British Columbia, the Yukon, and Saskatchewan. Wind chill values of minus 50 degrees are expected to hit the northern regions through to the weekend. Parts of Alberta, along with eastern Saskatchewan and western Manitoba, are also in for up to 20 centimeters of snow. A major storm that swept into Ontario from the United States yesterday also brought a wintry mixture of snow and high winds from central Ontario through to Newfoundland and Labrador. High winds could also cause coastal flooding in parts of the Maritimes. Schools were closed across much of New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and in parts of Nova Scotia, as some regions have received heavy rain, strong winds, and up to 25 centimeters of snow. Wind warnings and winter storm warnings have also been issued for the southern parts of Newfoundland and Labrador, where wind gusts hit up to 120 kilometers an hour. Quebec is also seeing a blast from Old Man Winter, with some regions expecting up to 40 centimeters of snow. A major winter storm that hit the U.S. Northeast has knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses. Parts of Maine were still digging out from a major snowstorm over the weekend as it was hit by powerful winds, snow, and rain that caused major flooding. Slushy highways led to the deaths of a driver in Wisconsin and another in Michigan, while several deaths have been reported on storms that hit the southern states as well. Well, Old Man Winter may have arrived last month, but he's really making his presence felt right now across many regions, including here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, we've seen quite a bit of snow lately, and we'll also be seeing much colder temperatures fairly soon.
Oh, he sure is, Hal. In fact, it might be a good week to just bunker down in your house, find a blanket, and just stay there like all week because it's not getting any better. We are looking at a minus 24 overnight, but with the wind chill, minus 30, we're looking at a risk of frostbite. And as we get into Thursday, it's looking even worse. We're looking at a high of minus 25. That temperature is going to drop to minus 29 by the afternoon with the wind chill, minus 42. And we're talking frostbite in minutes, folks. So stay safe, stay warm, stay indoors. And it's about to get even colder than that. And I'll be back later in the show with more details all about that. Hal?
Well, definitely stay warm, you bet. Thanks so much, Jeanette. And as Jeanette just mentioned, frostbite can occur within minutes in the coming days. Naturally, our thoughts turn to those who don't have a comfortable, warm place to go, including many of our city's most vulnerable. Ken Kissick of Streets Alive Missions says frostbite is one of their biggest concerns, but adds there's a lot of adequate indoor space where the displaced can go for safety.
This year, we believe there is adequate indoor space in the shelter to manage the population or pretty close to it. But there's always a group that wants to stay out, and that's a concern for us. It's also a concern to be able to continue to provide them with warm gloves, warm headwear, warm footwear, which we're in short supply of, so we could use some of that. And we're open for the warming center to allow them to come in and grab a coffee and everything else, as are some other places, the library, there's soup kitchen, there's certain places that open up when it gets this cold. And a lot of businesses, even though they struggle, they'll let people stand in the doorways longer and everything else. But it has potential to be severe for that population.
Kissick adds that Streets Alive outreach team will be working with the city this week to check in on the well-being of many of our homeless. This week's winter cold snap is hitting us very hard, and it's only expected to get worse. Deputy Fire Chief Kevin McEwen spoke to the media about what the city is doing to prepare for those who don't have a warm place to warm up.
We are reviewing our extreme temperature response policy. Within that policy, we community social development team reaches out to our external stakeholders and touches base with Alberta Health Services and other agencies that are responsible for dealing with our most vulnerable population. So City of Lethbridge is always going to be there to assist our partner agencies and to work with all those other partners to ensure people have somewhere warm to go. Part of that is a good piece of advice for those that don't have anywhere to go to. We do have our public buildings that are open. You know, if you need to get out of the cold and into somewhere indoors, downtown here, the library is a great place to go inside a little bit and warm up. During work hours, we have Park Place Mall. There's other public buildings around that you can get into to get yourself out of the elements for a little bit.
Yes, and McEwen adds, the most important thing to remember during these cold winter days is to make sure your skin is protected from the elements. A dry summer followed by late snowfall has created drought-like conditions and low reservoir levels here in southern Alberta. Joel Sanchez, Lethbridge's Director of Infrastructure Services, says the city has been working alongside the province for the last 3 months addressing the issues. He says that several working groups have been assigned to monitor the water levels and make recommendations to Lethbridge City Council.
Let's make sure everybody knows that, yes, we have conditions where the reservoirs are lower than what they have been in the past. I can mention a couple of them, even if we talk about the St. Mary's is in the single digits right now. That's almost, I will say, historical levels. Is typically at this time is over 50%, and right now we're in a single-digit situation. And when you go to the Oldman Water Reservoir, that one has been declining. We were sometime in July, the summer of last year, around 60%, 57%. September was around 35, and the latest number that we have is less than 30. So again, that number has been declining.
Now, one city councillor, however, says she's hearing concerns from residents regarding our water supply. Belinda Croson says the public needs to be more informed on the matter.
What is the reality? So what are the water levels? Will there be rationing in the spring? And very much also, what can they do? So I'm asking people who are asking, like, should we be getting drip irrigation if we're planning to have a garden this year? Right now is when gardeners are thinking about what to put in. So I know that those conversations are happening among gardeners in the community about what to even plant, whether to keep lawns or not, whether to get rain barrels. So the public would like some information. And when we do inquiries like that, it is a chance for our administration to bring forward information and to help educate the public. So that's why I brought that inquiry forward.
Officials say more information will be made available at the January 23rd City Council meeting. You know, with the cold weather and all of the snow we've been receiving across much of southwestern Alberta, it has made for a very busy time for the folks with the Alberta Motor Association. They say when it comes to our city here in Lethbridge, call volumes are going through the roof.
In the Lethbridge region, we're currently quoting about 2 hours. 2.5 hours for services. And we're seeing a lot of boost volume starting to come in, and we're going to see a slow progress over the next 2 days of boost volume coming in for sure. Anything to do with your vehicle that makes it inoperable. I mean, we do a lot of tire changing this time of year, especially when it starts to get icy on the roads, people sliding into curbs and such. We do see a lot of the unlocks, people starting their cars, of course, to keep them warm, and then locking their keys in their car becomes pretty popular this time of year as well. So we see that volume starts to pop up a little bit. And then, of course, the regular towing of vehicles breaking down at the side of the road or getting into car accidents.
The investigation continues involving a pedestrian who was hit by a car in Lethbridge last week, which left her with life-threatening injuries. Lethbridge police say last Thursday around 5:30 p.m. they received a call about a 39-year-old woman who collided with a Honda Civic as she was crossing the road on 2A Avenue North. She was taken to a Calgary hospital where she remains in critical condition. No word yet if any charges are being laid. 6 drug dealers have been charged in Lethbridge following a joint investigation by Alert's organized crime team and the Lethbridge Police Service. Officials say Alert's focus was to identify and target street-level drug traffickers who were selling fentanyls in downtown Lethbridge. The following suspects have been charged with at least 1 count of drug trafficking. 31-year-old Curtis Wilson from Tabor, 28-year-old D'Artagnan Poole of Lethbridge, 29-year-old Anthony Johnston from Colehurst, and 20-year-old Bryson North Pagan from Lethbridge. Police also say arrest warrants have been issued for 40-year-old Robert Ambrose from Lethbridge and 33-year-old Stacey Hubbard, also from our city here in Lethbridge. Police say if you witness or suspect any drug or gang-related activity in your neighborhood, to call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-TIPS. A Coaldale man is being charged following a shotgun blast on Sunday. Police say the man was walking around his residence in the town with a shotgun when it accidentally went off. He ended up shooting himself in the foot. EMS was called in and the man was taken to hospital to have his injury treated. 41-year-old Scott Eugene Conine of Coaldale faces several charges, including breach of conditions, unauthorized possession, and careless use of a firearm. He was scheduled to appear in court on Wednesday to answer to the charges. Lethbridge College is receiving $1 million from the province. The money will go toward expanding the capacity of the college's applied research in irrigation science. The college is one of 4 post-secondaries that will be receiving a portion of $3.6 million from Alberta's Research Capacity Program College Fund. The provincial grant is on top of the $1 million in federal funding Lethbridge College received last year from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. The smart irrigation infrastructure at the college's research farm is the first of its kind among post-secondaries here in Canada. The final numbers are in for donations received at a very popular Christmas light display in our city. The Attridge display collected donations of food and money in support of the Interfaith Food Bank and Angel Tree. The host of the display, Gregory Attridge, says the support received from the community was overwhelming.
I'm just astounded by the amount of support that the city has shown us, and you know, they were dropping food off every single day. We raised nearly 400 pounds of food for the Interfaith Food Bank, and we had 3 trunkfuls of toys for Angel Tree. It'll help them out for months to come.
What a beautiful display. A historic synagogue in Brooklyn, New York was trashed this week during an unusual community dispute that began with the discovery of a secret underground tunnel and ended with a brawl between police and worshipers. The conflict erupted at the headquarters of the Chabad Lubavitch movement in Crown Heights. It's a Jewish site that receives thousands of visitors annually. On Tuesday, police barricades went up at the synagogue after it was discovered that a tunnel was dug without city permission and may have caused structural damage to the famed property. Officials said young men in the community built the passage to the sanctuary in secret. Now, when the group's leaders tried to seal it off, they staged a protest that turned violent as police moved in to make arrests. Farmers in Germany are protesting subsidy cuts by their government by blocking major roadways. Officials say more than 500 tractors and trucks are now parked by Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. There are also reported blockages in Baden-Württemberg, North Rhine-Westphalia, Saxony, and Bavaria. The subsidy cuts were implemented by government officials to fix a budget crisis after a court ruled the government's 2024 budget was illegal. The cuts, however, have backfired in a big way, and there are fears that the blockades will grow across the country. Farmers have called on the government to scrap all plans for cutting their subsidies or the blockades will continue. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken dismissed a case filed by South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice, accusing it of genocide, calling the allegations meritless. Blinken says that simply distracts from efforts to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He also called on Israel to take greater steps to protect civilians while allowing for more aid to flow into the region.
It's particularly galling, given that those who are attacking Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as their supporter Iran, continue to openly call for the annihilation of Israel and the mass murder of Jews. On this trip, I came to Israel after meeting with the leaders of Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. All of those leaders share our concern about the spread of the conflict. All of them are committed to using their influence, using the ties that they have to prevent it from escalating. This crisis has clarified. You can't have one without the other, and you can't achieve either goal without an integrated regional approach. To make this possible, Israel must be a partner to Palestinian leaders who are willing to lead their people in living side by side in peace with Israel and as neighbors.
You may be wondering how the terrorist group Hamas came to be. Well, a reporter from the Associated Press explains the origin of the Palestinian militant group and their ideology, which is to wipe out Israel.
The Hamas militant group has ruled the Gaza Strip since overrunning the territory in 2007. Hamas was founded in Gaza in the late 1980s, and since then it has evolved from a small ragtag group into a formidable fighting force. Hamas is believed to have between 30,000 and 40,000 fighters in its army. it also possesses a sophisticated arsenal that includes rockets capable of striking deep inside Israel. Hamas's ideology is straightforward. It seeks the liberation of Palestinian lands through an armed struggle that includes the destruction of Israel. For this reason, Israel, the U.S., and other Western allies all consider Hamas to be a terrorist group. Now, Hamas receives funding and inspiration from Iran, and many of its leaders live in exile across the Middle East, but its stronghold is Gaza.
You know, we've not only talked extensively on Bridge City News about Hamas, but also the Houthi rebels. Who are they, and why have they been attacking ships in the Red Sea? Reporter John Gambrell explains.
The Houthis are a rebel group in Yemen that have held that country's capital since 2014. Since 2015, they've been battling a Saudi-led coalition there that supports the exiled government of Yemen. Now, the Houthis have received both support and weaponry from Iran as that war has gone on. Recently, though, the Houthis have begun launching attacks targeting ships in the Red Sea. The rebels say this is to support Palestinians stuck in the Gaza Strip amid Israel's war on Hamas, though many of the ships that they've been attacking don't have any clear links to Israel. This has endangered shipping up the Red Sea, into the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean Sea, and onward to Europe, disrupting cargo and energy shipments that are crucial for worldwide trade. The United States and allied nations have sent naval vessels into the Red Sea to shoot down Houthi missiles and drones, but the attacks have continued and shipping remains disrupted.
In May of last year, Nigerian pastor Zechariah returned home to find his wife and son had been killed in a vicious attack by Fulani militants. His home was also burned to the ground. Now, to help him deal with this devastating loss, Pastor Zechariah received trauma counseling and other practical support from Open Doors partners. We have more now in this report.
It was May 2023. Pastor Zechariah had been away from home and was returning to his village in Mangu, central Nigeria. Unaware of a devastating attack that had taken place, he started noticing people fleeing in the opposite direction.
Most of them were barefoot. Their bodies were covered with mud because they'd had to crawl to escape the attack. The closer I got to my house, the more I saw people with injuries and dead bodies beside the road. My house was completely burned down, including everything inside. I looked around the house to see if I could find my wife and son, but I couldn't find them. Finally, I checked all the rooms inside my house and found their dead bodies in the kitchen area.
The attack on Pastor Zechariah's village was one of several in the region that killed 125 people in a single week. The Fulani militants didn't explain why they targeted the mostly Christian communities.
My opinion of why we were attacked is that it was their wish for us to be converted to Islam. And they hoped that by chasing us away, they would have more space to graze their cattle. When it happened, I felt like God had forsaken me. I began to think, if he's the true God, then why did he allow them to attack us? Where was he? Where was God? Why did he not take action?
Open Doors partners invited Pastor Zechariah and other survivors to spend time at their trauma centre. There he could find relief from the many questions weighing on his mind.
Truly, if I hadn't come for this training, I think that life would have been very hard for me. Because in the months before I went for the training, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept going back to the attacks. But after receiving the trauma care, my mind is at rest. This teaching really has encouraged me. And they also taught us to forgive those who attacked us. I want to tell people who find themselves in situations like we've experienced, my prayer for you is that we should rely on God, because he is everything we live for.
Oh, that's faith. Pastor Zachariah almost sounds like a modern-day Job. Wow. Well, the snow plows were out again today in Lethbridge as we receive more snow, and the white stuff will be sticking around over the next few days. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. You know how during the holidays, relatives can sometimes overstay their welcome? That's how some people are feeling about Old Man Winter here in southwestern Alberta, even though he hasn't been here that long. We need the moisture with the snow, but not the bitterly cold temperatures. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, with wind chill values over the next few days, could we maybe get below minus 40 degrees?
Oh, unfortunately, you heard that correctly, Hal. We are looking at minus 42 wind chill by tomorrow afternoon, and we're talking wind chill, meaning frostbite in minutes. That's happening tomorrow. We're still expecting snowfall tonight and tomorrow before we get into the sunny skies, but still cold. It's going to get even colder by this weekend. Minus 32 for a high on Friday, minus 31 on Saturday, minus 21 on Sunday, not as bad. Still sunny skies, and then we're going to see more single-digit minuses by the beginning of next week to round out that 7-day forecast. We're looking at minus 9 for both Monday and Tuesday, bringing us more kind of into that seasonal range there. Minus 2 is the average high for this time of year, minus 14 the average low. 12 was our high temperature back in 1941 and 1974. We were looking at the chilliest on record, which was minus 37, more matching what we're looking at this coming week. 8:26 is when the sun rose this morning, sunset this afternoon at 4:52 p.m. We are going to have actually 2 minutes more daylight today than we did yesterday. On the west coast, mix of sun and cloud in Victoria, looking at 60k winds though by the Juan de Fuca Strait, high of 5 degrees. 3 expected to be the high tomorrow in Vancouver. Vancouver looking at a 40% chance of flurries late afternoon. Also, that snowfall warning is still in effect for the Coquihalla Highway between Hope and Merritt, looking at 15 to 20 centimeters of snow as that low pressure system is sort of moving across the area there. 30% chance of flurries expected in Edmonton tomorrow, 27 for a high. Not with wind chill though, expecting minus 40 with wind chill. We're looking at frostbite in minutes. Same thing for Calgary, frostbite in minutes with the wind chill. Minus 27 is the actual high. Going to actually feel colder by the afternoon and a 60% chance of flurries there. Speaking of flurries, 60% chance of flurries also expected in both Saskatoon and Regina tomorrow. Minus 23 for a high in Saskatoon, minus 24 in Regina. Wind chill factors are going to feel colder, and we're looking at risk of frostbite in both of those cities. And Alberta Clipper is moving into southern Manitoba, bringing heavy snowfall to the Red River Valley area. Winnipeg looking at 5 centimeters of snow, minus 17 for the high there. Okay, as we look to the central part of the country here, Toronto expecting a high of 1 degree, 2 to 4 centimeters of snow throughout the day. Minus 5 expected in Ottawa, 70% chance of light snow, and a 60% chance of flurries expected in Montreal there with a high of minus 4. Increasing clouds tomorrow in Fredericton as we're going to see the rainfall stop this evening. 3 degrees for a high there, 5 for a high in Halifax. Halifax was under wind and rainfall warnings. Not so much by tomorrow though, still expecting 30% chance of rain though tomorrow in Halifax. 5 degrees for an expected high in Charlottetown and up to 60k winds. It should die down by later on in the day. 3 degrees for a high in St. John's. St. John's looking at 2 centimeters of snow mixed with ice pellets, and that could change to drizzle and showers by later on in the day. And up to 80k winds along the coast there. So there you have it. That is your weather.
Australia's online safety watchdog says the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, has seen its global trust and safety slashed by 30% since Elon Musk bought it back in 2022. That includes an 80% reduction in the number of safety engineers. eSafety Commission has released summaries of answers provided by X to questions about how its policies about hateful conduct are being enforced. The platform's responses to user reports of hateful content have also slowed since Musk took over, with thousands of previously banned accounts being reinstated. A climate advocacy group is asking securities regulators to investigate the use of terms like sustainable finance by Canada's 5 big banks. Investors for Paris Compliance complained that banks are potentially deceiving investors by claiming that their $2 trillion in sustainable finance pledges will help them achieve climate goals. The submission to the Ontario Securities Commission and Quebec Securities Regulator notes that terms like sustainable finance are simply too broad. Banks are apparently not backing up the commitments with clear disclosures around how much the lending might affect emissions. The Canadian Bankers Association says banks follow market standards on disclosure and are working with regulators to advance sustainability reporting measures. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 18 points on the day to finish at 20,989. The Dow was up 170 points to 37,695. The S&P 500 was up 26 on the day to 4783, and the Nasdaq was up 111 points to 14,969. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 91 cents to 71.33 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 16 cents to 3.03 US. Gold was down 5.76 on the day to $2,024.44 US an ounce, and silver was down 8 cents to 22.90 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.84 per bushel, barley's at $6.58, canola's at $13.62, and corn is at $7.67 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was down 3 cents to 170.75. Feeder cattle were up 85 cents to 224.63, and lean hogs February contract was up 20 cents to 72.08. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.74 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Environment Canada has issued Arctic outflow and extreme cold warnings for many parts of the West, including here in Alberta, also in BC, the Yukon, and Saskatchewan. Wind chill values of minus 50 degrees are expected to hit the northern regions throughout the weekend. Parts of Alberta, along with eastern Saskatchewan and western Manitoba, are also in for up to 20 centimeters of snow. You know, the carbon tax has been hurting a lot of families and impacting Canadian businesses in a big way. That's according to Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who will have more details for us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of our local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. The Liberal gun bill has passed in the Senate, and it has angered a lot of legal gun owners who say it really targets them and does nothing to address real gun crime here in Canada. Now, to talk about this in more detail is Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas, who joins us from Lethbridge. Rachel, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Great to be with you.
Now, while Bill C-21 was discussed as a means to tackle gun crime, there were a lot of concerns raised that most gun crimes were from guns that were smuggled in from the United States and not from legal gun owners like hunters and those on ranches.
Well, I think that's exactly it, Hal. You've really nailed the problem on the head. Look, we know that those who have a gun license were tested, they've been trained, and they hold that license having gone through due course. And then, of course, once they have that license, they can acquire a firearm. And of course, they're expected to use it responsibly. And if they should fail to do so, they'll be stripped of their license and their firearm. So in Canada, we actually have really strict laws already. And we know that the crimes that are being committed are not being committed by those who have gone through proper process, but rather by those who are smuggling guns into Canada. So, you know, the legislation that Prime Minister Trudeau has brought forward now, Bill C-21, will really do nothing to clean up the streets of our communities. You know, what needed to happen was we needed to reinforce our policing. We needed to go after gangs. We need to go after gun violence. We need to go after those who are smuggling firearms across the U.S. border into Canada. These are the types of things that are, you know, tangible actions that can be taken that would really make a meaningful difference. So, unfortunately, instead, Trudeau has decided that he's going to play politics. He would like Canadians to believe that he is doing something when in fact he's not, to keep our streets safe. And in reality, he's going after, you know, law-abiding hunters, law-abiding, you know, sport shooters, and of course, Indigenous folks who, you know, enjoy a traditional way of life as well.
Now, speaking of our Prime Minister, he was asked recently if he was really seriously considering finally axing the carbon tax. And the question was met by a resounding no. Rachel, why do you think that the message is not getting through to our Prime Minister that this tax is hurting so many industries and so many Canadians?
Well, if I tried to get into the head of Trudeau, I'm afraid that it would, make my head spin. I'm really not able to make sense of what is in his head at times. And I think, this is no exception. When it comes to the carbon tax, we know that it drives up the price of everything, from the time seed goes into the ground to the time that a harvest takes place to the time that food is processed and then onto grocery store shelves and then comes home. All of those steps along the way are, have a carbon tax applied to them. And so then, of course, when Canadians, go to the grocery store to pick up a jug of milk or a box of cereal, they're having to incur the cost. And we know that Canadians are already struggling with affordability. We know that they're having a really hard time making ends meet. We know that they're cutting back on necessities. We know that they're skipping meals. And we know that, a good portion of Canadians are close to insolvency or being in trouble. And so I think we're in a really destitute place as a Canadian public. And unfortunately, we have a prime minister who doesn't seem to lean in and care.
And we see a lot more Canadians, too, having to walk away from some of their mortgages as well with the high cost of inflation. It's just incredible. More and more tent cities going up all over the place. Not just those battling addictions, but those who've lost everything because of the high cost of living right now. Rachel, let's also talk about the expansion of the MAID bill, or medical assistance in dying, to include those with mental illness. Now, you say that assisted death here is not the answer, calling it, quote, reckless and irresponsible.
Yeah, I stand by those words. Medical assistance in dying came into place in 2016, and it's expanded slowly over time since then. Now the government is looking at making it possible for an individual with mental illness to ask for medical assistance in dying just based on the mental illness alone. And that'll come into place this spring. Now, there have been many voices that have vocally spoken out against this, including, across the board, every single community that represents persons with disabilities has spoken out on this bill. Or this expansion, I should say. In addition to that, every medical school in the country, the head of their psychiatric training, has spoken out about this bill and said that it goes too far. And so, there's this push from the Liberal government to make medical assistance in dying more and more accessible. And there are others who are actual professionals who are speaking out and saying it's too far. So my colleague, Mr. Ed Fast from British Columbia, he created a private members bill that actually would scope out, in other words, protect those with mental illness and make it so that they could not request medical assistance in dying. Unfortunately, his bill was not successful in passing the House of Commons because the Bloc and the Liberals colluded in order to stop it. So I think that's a sad day for Canadians, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're a country that takes care of our most vulnerable. And of course, those who are struggling with a disability or with a mental illness are those that we should be looking after, not offering death.
And those concerns are also shared by Alex Schadenberg, the Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, who we've had on our program many times before, saying, there are better ways in solving and helping people across the country here, solving the issues.
Absolutely.
Now, Rachel, you and your leader, Pierre Poilievre, say the Trudeau government embezzled $150 million in their green slush fund. Now, the news broke recently thanks to a whistleblower. Millions of Canadians are struggling and going to food banks right now, over 2 million Canadians so far this year. You say the Liberals are more interested in serving its insiders rather than the people of Canada?
Well, certainly. Unfortunately, we're looking at a government that would rather reward its friends and make sure that they're looked after rather than serving Canadians. So, it's come to our attention, based on a brave whistleblower, that about $150 million was, taken and given to insiders rather than used for actual, projects. That's a problem. And so, we've had a lot come to light since this has been investigated at Ethics Committee in the House of Commons. This has been something that as Conservatives, we've been fighting for quite some time now, and just trying to draw attention to. And so I'm really proud of my colleagues at the Ethics Committee. In particular, Michael Barrett has been the lead on this. And I just think they've done a phenomenal job shedding light on the scandal, shedding light on the misuse of funds by this government and handing it out to friends. I should also mention, this isn't the first time. The government also created the app for coming into Canada, and spent $54 million on it. And it's come to light now that a whole bunch of that money was actually just, again, funneled to Friends rather than used for the creation of the Arrive Can app. And they are currently under investigation by the RCMP. And so we'll wait and see what comes of that. But what we do know is that there are numerous examples of corruption within this government, and Conservatives are certainly kept busy trying to stay on top of it all. But it's worth it because we believe that Canadians deserve to know the truth.
The Liberals blocked a Tory motion calling for no bonuses for the CBC. Rachel, our public broadcaster, is laying off around 600 employees, and yet the head of the CBC, Catherine Tate, during a recent interview, wouldn't rule out bonuses for top executives. Bonuses paid for by our tax dollars.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Certainly, I've been trying to draw as much attention to this as possible. You know, the CBC is funded to the tune of $1.4 billion from the Canadian taxpayers. That's a whole lot of money. And you want to make sure that that public broadcaster and the head of that public broadcaster, the CEO, Ms. Tate, are being held accountable to produce what Canadians want. You know, and functioning in a manner that is actually stewarding those dollars. So when Ms. Tate came out, you know, just weeks before Christmas and made the determination that she would let go 600 employees and not fill another 200 positions. So that means a total of 800 positions are gone. And this announcement is coming out just before Christmas. I mean, number one, the timing is cruel. And number two, you know, you have a CEO who just received a $60,000 bonus in July. And meanwhile, she's, you know, laying people off just a few weeks before Christmas. And then on top of that, she was asked, well, does that mean the top execs, those at the top, are not going to be receiving bonuses? And she just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, well, you know, not quite. So she's left that door open. And I think that's alarming because, you know, to have someone at the head, to have someone at the helm willing to cut 800 jobs in a ruthless manner, but still willing to give out potentially tens of millions of dollars in bonuses, I think that's cruel and I think it's mismanagement.
Let's talk about the Speaker of the House for just a moment here. There's been pressure by your party to force the Speaker of the House, Greg Fergus, to resign. Rachel, why is that?
Well, you know, Mr. Fergus is a relatively new speaker. He's been there for several months now, but no doubt he knows the rules because, of course, the first act of business when you're, you know, made the Speaker of the House and it's an elected position, it's one of trust. The first act is to become familiar with the standing orders and to be able to reinforce those. And so one of those standing orders requires him to remain non-partial, or impartial, sorry, I should say, non-partisan. And yet he dressed in his robes as the Speaker of the House and then delivered a video greeting that was then shown at the Ontario Liberal Convention. And so, of course, this came to light. And as Conservatives, we've been pushing for his resignation because at the end of the day, he's proven that he isn't able to act in an impartial manner. He's proven that he does put partisanship ahead of his role as Speaker, and we find that problematic, not just for us as the Conservative Party of Canada and members of the House, but for all Canadians, because when the Speaker of the House acts in this way, it actually robs certain individuals of their voice.
Rachel, your party, the Conservative Party of Canada, is well ahead in the polls. In fact, if an election was held today, the Tories would win an easy majority government. Now, you tried to bring down the government with 30 hours of non-confidence votes to no avail. What will it take to end the Liberal-NDP coalition?
Well, I think at the end of the day, you know, the most sincere and best answer I can give is it's going to take the Canadian public to speak up and to, you know, be bold in their vote. And so the next time we have, you know, an election, you know, my hope would be that Canadians are tired of the corruption of this current government, that they're tired of the misspending, that they're tired of watching, you know, their cost of living skyrocket and go through the roof, that they're tired of crime escalating to a point where, you know, our country seems unrecognizable in some places. And so, you know, my hope, I guess, is that Canadians would see these things and not only see them, but that they would have the boldness or the courage to vote against the current government and to choose something new so that their future might look a whole lot better.
You know, there's some insiders who say that Justin Trudeau may actually be forced to resign and take that long walk in the snow here to give his party a chance of being re-elected, something similar to what his father Pierre Elliott Trudeau did 40 years ago. But other people say, no, Trudeau's going to stay on as leader, and he's pretty happy to do so. What are you hearing right now on the Hill? Will Trudeau stay on as leader of the Federal Liberal Party of Canada?
Yeah, there's certainly a great deal of speculation around this. Of course, there are those who believe that he's perhaps going to be shown the door by those who are inside his party that might have some sway. There are others who think he himself might come to that decision, and then of course there's another group of folks who believe he is absolutely going to stay in that position and try to win another election. So every thought is on the table, and the only way we'll know for sure, of course, is when the election is actually called, and we'll see who's in charge of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage and Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
Did you know that, as with most languages, the words for certain modern-day items didn't always exist? And this, of course, is especially true of Indigenous languages like the Blackfoot language. In fact, it's quite interesting how some of the Blackfoot elders have come up with words or phrases for modern items like computers, cell phones, and texting. I'm so pleased to have Arnold Fox joining me today. Arnold is the director of the Blood Tribe Social Development, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more about Blackfoot language and interpretation. Welcome to the show, Arnold. Great to have you on today.
Happy to be here, Jeanette.
Okay, so why don't you maybe start off by telling me a bit about what you do, what your work kind of looks like over there at Blood Tribe Social Development?
Okay. Well, in relation to the Blackfoot signage project and in relation to the Blackfoot language, our department stepped forward to host what we eventually called ATEEP Weeks Language Committee. So ATEEP Weeks means Blackfoot speaking. That's what that phrase, that word means, ATEEP Week. So we're the speaking language group. And the task that was given to us, it was instituted a little over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. The major part of our task is to help preserve the Blackfoot language and to help the language itself move along and adapt to current terms that are used today in our everyday language. So that's why it's a dual function. We realize that a lot of First Nations across the country are losing the language. I believe there's some dire predictions that within 25 years, we will just have 3 First Nation languages still functional in Canada.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite astounding once you think about it. And I grew up with the Blackfoot was the first language, and I can't really envision not being able to use that or not giving it to our children and our grandchildren to be able to carry forth. So that was the gist of our task in that committee. The committee itself has 10 to 12 elders who come together once a month, and we offer an annual symposium. Blackfoot Language and Symposium in Lethbridge is the most convenient location. There are some representations from other Blackfoot nations in the area, Blackfeet in Montana, the Pinchot Nation near Pincher Creek, and Siksika near east of Calgary. So those are the Blackfoot-speaking nations in North America.
Fascinating,
Yeah. So out of that, I would say I'm being optimistic by saying 20% of us still use that language on an everyday basis. So it definitely is in fear of dying at a certain point or not being utilized anymore. So that's what we're hoping to. That's what we're hoping to avoid. We're realizing now with the programs that we offer, even in social services, we offer short-term employment training for our clients, and we have fully realized over the years that one of the modules they take is the Blackfoot culture and the Blackfoot language. I used to take for granted that our younger people had this opportunity to learn at home and all of that, but that's not the case. We were, in my generation, we were lucky that there was a very limited amount of influence from media So the everyday language we heard all the time was Blackfoot, whereas our younger people are inundated with TV, just to start there, radio. Often tell my audiences that when I was growing up in the 50s, 1950s, we had a radio, an old radio that sat on top of a cabinet, and there was a big dry cell battery. So whenever the battery went dead, there went our connection with the outside world.
Sure.
We were particularly insular in those days, so we didn't have all those influences.
Yeah.
Just like one of my nephews, we made a concerted effort to have him speak Blackfoot from the time he started uttering words. And he was doing really good. Hey, we noticed that the words he was uttering up to 2 years of age were Blackfoot. But that's because in the home we had decided, no, he's going to speak Blackfoot. He discovered TV around that age, and what's that? Anyways, he discovered it and was very drawn.
Probably
to
Nickelodeon or, you know, the kids shows, right?
Sesame Street, you know, but they're all in English, eh?
Yeah.
So we realize the influence that our young people have to live with is nothing like what I went through growing up. It was comfortable for me to carry on the Blackfoot language, but it's not that for our kids anymore.
No, that's so interesting, and it's so true, and it's something we don't really think about. You were mentioning that they're predicting there could only be 3 Indigenous languages left. How many are there? I mean, there must be hundreds, right?
Well, yeah, if you stop to think, there are 500 plus different First Nations in Canada. To get an idea, of course, there's regional, you know, like the Woodland Cree have a big area in most of the provinces. So that language I know will survive because there's a lot of speakers over an extended geographical area. But once you start, like I said, becoming too insular, you don't have that opportunity. And in our population too.
Definitely. So interesting. Now, Arnold, as the director of the Blood Tribe Social Services, I know that you are also involved in a Blackfoot signage project. And just for some background for our viewers, several organizations in southwestern Alberta, I guess, have partnered up with Kainai Nation to fund the construction of Blackfoot language signs across the region. So I guess this is to both enrich the landscape and invite locals and visitors to learn more about the deep history of the region. And I would say have the opportunity to see the translations of certain community names in the Blackfoot language sort of come to life. I find that really interesting. So Arnold, as the director of Blood Tribe Social Services, you're a part of this signage project, which will see these beautiful signs come to life with this language. So tell me more about this project and sort of how it came to be.
Okay, I would like to think that really the idea was planted as part of the TNR, the Truth and Reconciliation. All of the recommendations, I think there was 108 recommendations that came from that. And I've been noticing in southern Alberta, in my world, I travel a lot to Lethbridge. We're not confined. We shop in Fort McLeod, Cardston. So we have a lot of daily interaction with these communities. And the Blackfoot names that were assigned to these communities go way back. Now, there's some newer communities that we're going to have to sit with the elders to develop the name. So South Rose, the name of the organization that invited me to join. And so I did. And I didn't really know at first what the extent of the program was. But in our first couple of meetings, I've grown to appreciate that this is a really worthwhile effort for southern Alberta. I don't think there's enough we can do to further the relations between the population here, the Blackfoot or Blood population on Kainai, and the surrounding communities. There's been some excellent relationships that have developed over the years. I can two at this point that are kind of related to what we're doing. It just emphasizes more communication, positive in a positive light. So that's what we're doing with these. Now we're going to open it up. It's open to towns and counties. You know how when you enter a county, you see a little sign?
Like welcome to Tabor or Cardston or,
So those are the two kind of that are foremost. Certainly welcome to look at other, but for those two, for the towns and the counties, we're definitely looking and hoping to get applications from them to this on this signage. I'm thinking it's another opportunity for us to interact with the wider population. And there's another initiative that's looking at racism and working with the mayors of the surrounding towns and trying to establish a common footing to address the racism. Now, there was another project I was thinking of, but those give you an idea that there's more activity, there's more interaction between the Black community and the surrounding. We've utilized the towns, like I said, for shopping. 50% of our kids are bused off the blood reserve to the surrounding communities to attend school. So there's a great deal of interaction, and we just want to try and do our part to ensure that there's more positive chances than there are for negative interaction.
Yeah, no, it's such a fabulous idea, and I just look forward to seeing these new signs going up. And I believe the project is inviting communities, businesses, institutions to take part. And what they can do is, I believe they can apply. Is it a $2,000 grant that they can receive for the creation of this sign, right?
With the stipulation, they throw in 500. So we're offering them 80% funding for the sign. Yeah. So I should mention also, Jeanette, that I explained to the committee that I'm working, to the signage committee, that there are names for some of the older communities in southern Alberta, but it's not always a direct translation. There's something that strikes our elders that's peculiar about this, and that sometimes they go with that. I'll give you an example, Tabor.
Okay.
Because Tabor sounds similar to table.
Okay.
That's actually that our name for Tabor is Itasuyo, which means something we eat on, which was the name we gave. It's not, whereas Fort McLeod, Agapioyus, means many houses. So that's where the fort was established, and then the community started growing. So we refer to it as many houses. So that's been historically the name. Yes, and Lethbridge, Sikoho, Black Rock, for the coal mining history that Lethbridge was the central part of in southern Alberta. So it would be a direct translation or just a similar sounding word in the English language, like Tabor. Right?
I've also been told, Arnold, that you're a wealth of information when it comes to the language, the Blackfoot language, and particularly how some of the language has had to sort of adapt over the years to accommodate more for modern words, almost like, like the technology that we use, like computers, cell phones, because those weren't around, obviously, back when the Blackfoot language was coming to be. I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
So we, at the annual symposium where we gather the reps mainly from Ghana, from Blood, but like I said, the 3 other Blackfoot nations always have reps there. So one session is always devoted, we call it coining new phrases, coining new. So the audience is invited. We always limit it to around 200, 225, and it's always full. We have to turn people away. So we know it's been a very popular symposium over the years. So in opening up that one session, we invite the audience to submit words that they would like translated. And we'd like to make a difference at this point between translation and interpretation. So we offer both. We can interpret word for word, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily work. So sometimes we have to interpret what the speaker is trying to say and then issue our word for it or develop our word for it. So, so that's been a major part of our work in bringing the community together. And what we want to do is, when we have enough of these new words, publish them in a booklet so people can use them for easy reference. There's been a number of other organizations that have developed apps for the Blackfoot language. So you just go into that and you get the translation for the, well, not the translate, the pronunciation.
Okay.
And the translation or interpretation of. So there's a lot of tools that are available out there for people who are interested to start learning it. So texting at our second last symposium, we said, okay, everybody, even our seniors use texts nowadays, eh? So we said, okay, how do we translate it? And the most accepted one in the symposium seemed to be Steckam Sinakyo, an object or a process where you write fast. So that's how we.
Okay. So it interprets into process where you write fast. Texting. Maybe not for all of us though. Especially when you get those clumsy thumbsies, you know, and you're like, have to go back. That's not what I meant to say. Arnold, it looks like we're about out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today and having this really fun conversation about, you know, some of the interpretation of Blackfoot language. It's really interesting.
Okay, well, I hope we have a chance as we move further along. I can report how many communities have taken us up on our offer, etc. Yeah.
I would love to hear that. Thanks so much, Arnold. Okay. Arnold Fox is the Director of Blood Tribe Social Services. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.